All right. Grab your seat there. Grab your Bibles. I'm glad you're here this morning. Everybody good? Okay, good. All right, Revelation chapter 2 is where we're going to be this morning. I hope you've enjoyed the rain. And I hope that you're enjoying this Revelation series that we're working through. If you've not been here, and this is new to you or you're visiting this morning, we are working through the book of Revelation. Now, one of the things that I committed to do this series, because my series end up turning into a long journey from time to time, because I have so much to teach you and so little time is what I always say. I have the same amount of time every week. But anyways, I want you to know what I know, and I want us to learn together. But we have committed to getting through the first, the 7 letters to the 7 churches. And so we started 4 weeks ago on this series, and I quickly turned the first sermon into 2 sermons, and so it already put us behind. Last week we talked about the church at Ephesus, and this morning we're talking about the church at Smyrna. Now, I say that to say this. We have been starting our journey through Revelation by reading the Word together. Rather than me reading it to you, I share it with you on screen, and I set it to a soundtrack because I've said, and you don't have to agree with this, that's fine, but Revelation is so powerful, it's so visual, that sometimes just having that background, it just allows your mind to come alive and you can see it the way that it is written and taken place. Now remember, before you read this, we're talking about the church at Smyrna this morning. The church at Smyrna, if you do any research, if you look up commentaries, which is Bible study books, if you look up anything, more than likely they're going to say that the letter to the church at Smyrna is the letter to the suffering church, because there is so much suffering that's going on in Smyrna because of persecution. And that is very true. You had believers who are going to end up being burned at the stake. You have believers that are going to be fed to wild beasts. You have people that are going to be crucified. They are in a moment of suffering currently through persecution. They're losing certain things. But I see it more as a letter to the courageous church, because it becomes extremely courageous to be a member of the church at Smyrna. I think the church at Smyrna may be one of the most difficult places to be a believer. Smyrna as a whole may be one of the most difficult places to be a believer in Jesus Christ. And so the letter is written, just for context, so that your mind can go there as you read it. John is in Patmos. We've already read Revelation 1 where he introduces the context of the letter, of the revealing of Christ, the revealing of the end. And then we read through Ephesians, or the letter to the church at Ephesus last week, and we realized that church had left its first love. This one is the suffering church. And when you read it, you're going to realize a couple of things. Number one, there's no rebuke. There's only 2 churches that are not rebuked. Smyrna is one of them. And number 2 is he is encouraging them to face suffering head on. Let me ask you a question. What if you knew by meeting this morning that there was a warrant out for your life and your children and the children that worship with us and all the children that are in the nursery? What if you knew this morning, because you're here, that you're literally taking your life in your own hands? I think at today's time it'd probably be a lot easier to watch online, right? It'd be a lot easier, but then they'd be looking up our IP addresses. But what if coming here this morning meant your life was on the line? Well, this morning that's not the case for you. Thank goodness. That's not the case for me. In fact, I've never had that be the case. But there was a time when that was the case. And simply going to church or being a part of a church or being a believer was enough to end your life. And Christ writes this letter and shares with them this understanding of suffering and the suffering that will come. So, without any further ado, let's watch our scripture together, all right? Let your minds go there. when you start looking at the church at Smyrna, they're unlike some of the other churches. This particular church is a group of people, and I'm not going to say they're hunkering down or in a corner, but that's in effect what they were doing. Very difficult to be a church a member and a Christian in Smyrna. And Christ writes that letter. If you read it and let your mind kind of work there a little bit, and I know it's a little bit dramatic, but I do that on purpose because it allows it to come to life. If you start to read it, you realize that there's people sitting, and what Christ is telling them is this: don't you back up, but you go. Step into it. I told the first service this: it'd be a lot better, I think, if I was a member of the church at Smyrna, if Jesus had written a letter and said, hey, I'm on my way down there. I'm going to take care of all those people that are killing the people that you love. That'd be a lot better, right? Because that's how we pray, isn't it? Like if y'all come to the end of the service and you get on your face, you're like, Jesus, just get involved in my circumstances, close the mouths of liars, help me with those who are hurting me, and all those kind of things. And we just think Jesus is just waiting just to go, okay, here I come, here comes Dad, that kind of thing. But sometimes what he says is don't back up. And it's going to be tough, and it's going to cost you a lot. Don't back up. And so that's what he says to this church. And I want to share with you some things on this particular church. And this particular series has stretched me in ways that I'm not normally stretched, meaning this: I preach a certain way. I preach in a way that I kind of preach kind of an encourager. We tackle things the way that they come on, and then I encourage you to stand in there. And so I'm kind of bold in those ways, and that's kind of my kind of way of communicating. This particular series is causing me to have to do more in the area of history. And so as we look at this, I'm going to be teaching you a lot of history this morning on the people of Smyrna. So just hang with me, and then here's how we'll do it. We'll do the history of the town of Smyrna. We'll do the history of the church in Smyrna, and then I'll do a practical application on your way out. Is that okay with everybody? Because I really want you to know it. And what it does is it sets up not only the letters and how they're written, but it sets up the rest of Revelation, because you have to realize that each of these congregations are going through different things. Ephesus had lost their first love, and Smyrna has not lost their first love. They love their first love. They are all into Jesus Christ, but they literally are facing the fact that they may lose their life, and nobody's backing up one iota. And so they're very vulnerable, and Christ writes that letter, but you have to know the history and the context of the letter to really understand it, all right? So with all that said, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 2, and we're going to look at the letter to the church at Smyrna. A couple of things you're going to want to take note of as we look and before I pray is this. You're going to see some words in here, and you're going to have to understand when Revelation was written in the biblical time of John and the people that he is writing it to, there's words that were used that we don't use a lot today. And in fact, when we hear these words, we are kind of shocked by them, and we really don't know what to do with them. Meaning this, they used words like Antichrist. They would use the word Antichrist. We read Revelation and we think of Antichrist singular, right? Who is the ultimate Antichrist to Jesus Christ when the rapture happens and when the tribulation and the peril and all that. And they would use these words unlike us, meaning this, anything that was opposed to Jesus Christ in biblical times was known as the Antichrist. So if I came up here and preached anything different than the Christianity and Jesus Christ and grace through faith, and I preached anything other than Christ, I would be guilty of being an antichrist. Does that make sense? So when they used that, they understood that. They would use words like blasphemy. You saw it in the text. If you read along with us, you saw the word blasphemy. If you read it in the context, you go, well, that doesn't make sense because it says that they're blaspheming against this church. How's that possible? We know blasphemy as the understanding of blaspheming the Holy Spirit, rejecting the Holy Spirit. That's what blasphemy is. In this particular text that you're going to see in just a moment, the blasphemy that they're talking about is rejecting of the Christians, okay? They're blaspheming them. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Some of y'all think that blasphemy is cursing God. That's not what that is. It is literally, that's not a good thing, but blasphemy is rejecting the Holy Spirit, okay? And the Bible talks about that in the Gospels. But this morning you're going to hear that word come up too. You're not going to hear Antichrist. We'll put that in perspective over the next couple of weeks. My wife asked me the other day, it's funny because thinking about Revelation, we were riding around, and she goes, do you think such and such is the Antichrist? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. But we use those terms that way, all right? And so you're going to see that. You're going to see the word Satan and devil used a little more loosely in this particular understanding where, in today's time, in this politically correct environment that we live in, we don't say a lot of time, they're of Satan, or they're of the devil, or that's the work of the devil. We say things like this, like that was evil, or they're work for the enemy, or all those kind of things, because you use the word Satan or devil, you throw that out there, and it has a certain nuance to it. In biblical times, that's what they'd say. If you're doing the opposite of Christ, you're working for the devil. You're working for Satan. They would use those terms, okay? So you have to understand that. They're using this language that each one would have understood, and Smyrna was dead smack in the middle of it. I stand on it. I think Smyrna would have been the hardest church to be a church member of. And I don't know that there's a person in this room that could have done it. You say, well, you don't know me. I know you live in 2025. And you sat at home during COVID, you couldn't do it. You know what I mean? Like that's who we are. We're soft. I don't mean that. You know what I mean? We're soft. We don't like our fries to be late at McDonald's. We're soft. These people were under threat of losing their heads and their family, and some were already losing their life. So when you read this and you see what Jesus is writing, it is astounding, these people in Smyrna. Another thing before I pray, just so that you know, when I did Ephesus and I showed you Patmos, I've been to those places. I've never been to Smyrna. It's further up north into Turkey. I'll show you in just a moment. I'd love to go there. But I'm giving you some information on what it looks like based on me not actually seeing it. I've just seen pictures of it. I've been close to it. I've just never been there, all right? So anyways, let me pray for us, and let's jump into the letter to the church in Smyrna. God, I love you. I'm so thankful for a rich heritage of men and women who stood through some of the darkest days, that stood firm, that were willing to suffer for the cause of Christ. They were willing to stand and be accounted for, despite the persecution, despite what was being said, despite what they were going through. They put themselves and their families on the line. And God, it's just hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine for us in today's time that you would ask somebody to do that, but you did, and they did it, and I'm so thankful for that. God, I pray that you would encourage us, that you would rise up a spirit of Smyrna in some of us, that we'd be willing to put it all on the line, that we wouldn't back up, that we would be courageous, that God, we would walk through suffering, trusting that you're doing a great work. And God, I pray that you would bless our time together this morning. Some are suffering today. Has nothing to do with this church or Revelation. They're just suffering in life. And I pray that today would teach them how to walk through suffering. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to give you the history of Smyrna. I'm going to give you a history of the church in Smyrna, and then we're going to do practical application. The practical application, listen to this. Don't just look at the letters to the church in Smyrna or Ephesus or any of the other 5 churches that we'll look at and think of them as a dead letter, like it was just for them, just for that time. It was for that time, but it also precedes time. It goes further into time. It's for us today. And everything that Christ shared with these churches is meant for us to understand of how it applies to us today. Obviously, we're not living in 98 AD. We're living well beyond that. But our understanding of the truths that are in these letters still apply to us. And obviously, Christ is setting the tone. Every single congregation that he writes to, all 7, are going through different things. He mentions them in different ways and what they need to work on. But ultimately, when he gets to the end of their letters, then he starts on telling them how all this ends. The book of Revelation, how it all ends for us who are followers of Jesus Christ. One of the things that you'll find too in the letters is he always starts it one way for each different church. They all have different introductions, and they all have different endings, meaning they are promised different things, but they all work together to build one picture of Jesus Christ. Now, before we get into that and to set the stage, because I'm going to start with you, I'm going to talk about Smyrna and the church to the people in Smyrna, and then I'm going to end with you. I'm going to end with you. So begin with you, end with you, but Smyrna's in the middle. So let me ask you this: how do you handle suffering? How do you handle suffering? Without a doubt, there's people within the sound of my voice that are suffering today. I know that word is heavy. Suffering is heavy. You can be in pain, but you might say you're not suffering. If you're from the South, you know this. If you moved here, you may not know this, but there's a culture kind of understanding in the South where we do not want people to feel sorry for us. We have a sense of pride, and it's not always helpful, but we don't want handouts and we don't want help. We have a hard time asking for help, and we will suffer privately. There's also something else that happens inside of that. When we suffer privately in our pride and we don't want anybody to know, we then can often fall victim to throwing ourselves little pity parties. You ever had a pity party for yourself? Yeah, you ever had a private pity party? Or you feel bad for you? You know? Nobody knows. You know what I mean? The trouble. You know what I mean? Like, we can do that. No, I don't need no help, but then feel bad for ourselves. Some of us throw those pity parties in front of people, right? We're tired of it. You don't know what I'm going through, right? We tell our spouses that, our children that, children tell us that. We are not good at suffering. Then there's people within the sound of my voice. You're suffering physically. There's things going on in your life and you're suffering. You're in pain constantly. There's a whole industry that Satan has used to take advantage of the suffering of our friends and family through pain pills and through drugs. It has sucked the life out of a lot of people because they're privately suffering. They didn't intend to get hung up on that, but they were suffering privately, and it led to that. Some of us are suffering from broken hearts because someone we love has passed on. There's all types of suffering, and it's inside this room. But then there was suffering there in Smyrna, and we'll talk about it in just a minute. But let me ask you this question. Have you ever suffered or felt like you were suffering? That's just a yes or no question. You say, well, there's always somebody that's worse off than me. You know what I found about suffering is you're right, but suffering is subjective. Meaning this, you may be suffering, I can't feel your pain, but when I suffer, I can feel mine. So no matter what we're going through, I try to keep that perspective. There's always somebody worse off, that's fine, but right now, homeboy's going through this, and it hurts, right? In fact, if you want to see if that's a real thing, you watch somebody suffering, and then here's your words of encouragement. I know you're hurting, but there's always somebody worse off than you. See how that goes for you. Just walk into an emergency room and go, hey, I know you're down here going to have to pay that copay, and you're in a lot of pain, but there's somebody over there, bed 3, a lot worse off than you. All right, see you later. You write a Hallmark card, right? No, suffering is subjective. So the second question I have before we get into the people of Smyrna is this. How do you prepare for and walk through suffering? Suffering will fundamentally change you. It will fundamentally change you because most of the time suffering is private. Most of the time we hold it in. When it becomes public, it normally has a face to it. It looks like something. We can suffer quietly and privately with a broken heart. If you've ever been around somebody that's broken, had their spirit broken, they'll suffer privately. They may not tell you what's hurting. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm all right. But fundamentally, it'll change them. Meaning this, you'll say, they're just not what they use. Something going on, right? If you're suffering physically, it'll fundamentally change you. You get tired of hurting all the time. So the question is how do you prepare for and walk through suffering? That is the overall application, I feel, for the letter to Smyrna, because they are suffering and they are going to suffer, and Jesus Christ writes to them and tells them how to. So we'll come to that at the end, the application. So in order to understand that, let's walk through a little bit of history. And again, I told you, you're going to have to learn today, so put your thinking caps on. Here we go. The church in Smyrna, the history, the context of the letter, and the personal application. The history of Smyrna is very interesting. Smyrna, as you're going to find out, was a very beautiful city. So the first thing that you're going to find out is this. Last week, we left Patmos and we sailed over to Ephesus. Remember what I shared with you last week? Everybody entered into Turkey in this area. It doesn't mean that people didn't stop along the other borders, but this was the main entrance. This was the main hub. We also learned that Ephesus was moving backwards into Turkey because the silt was building up, and their harbor was eventually going to close the way that it is. They're going to be 6 miles in. But in the date of this letter, the book of Revelation was delivered to the churches. We started in Ephesus last week. They had lost their first love, and after the letter was delivered, they went dead north to the church in Smyrna. Now, Smyrna is north of Ephesus, but it is a beautiful, beautiful place, all right? Even today, it is beautiful. But in biblical times, they loved to go to Ephesus. Now, I mentioned to you last week, there was 2 places that were really important. Ephesus was one of those, and Pergamum is the other one. This was the capital, but this is where the governors lived. But Smyrna was the place that they liked to be. It was almost like the vacation home of Turkey, of all these governors. That's where they wanted to be, all right? So we make our way north to Smyrna. This is Smyrna. Now, if you'll notice, I've not been there, but these are some of the ruins of the city known as Smyrna. You can see the pillars that are still standing. You can also see the aqueducts right here. You see this? It's where the water would flow through. very interesting how they preserved all this through time. I want you to also notice, you see this block's just laying here and this block's laying down there. You'll learn this when you go with me one day. You start seeing these columns over here broken. Up here, if you pay close attention, you'll see like some where they have the brace on it. Some are fully intact, and then other ones of them are broke. That happens over time. You say, well, I don't want to know history. Just pay attention. This is where your forefathers lived. This is some of it today, the way they built up the city. We were over here looking just a few moments ago. This is on the back side of that. So they've grown up Smyrna during that time. And trust me, they didn't have these cars parked on top during John's time. But interesting thing, it's a beautiful city. It was well preserved, and there's a lot of artifacts that we can go look at. But if you'll notice this, and this is just an interesting fact I'm going to give you, if you notice how all these are different pieces, and if you also notice where these are standing straight up and down, some of these are laid sideways. They're just laid. There's a base, a base, a base, a base. Then you have some tops that are right here, right? And you got stuff like this that are sitting there. In biblical times, because many of these cities, they were thousands of years old, they'd be built and they'd be torn down. They'd be built and torn down. You say, why are you telling me that? Because this is what Smyrna went through. A building, a ruin, building, a ruin. A lot of different people played a part in it. In effect, it made them who they are. I'll show you in just a moment. But one of the most interesting things when we have all these different pieces of architecture and artifacts laying around, if you go into some of these old cities with us and old towns, and you go into Ephesus, and you go into Athens, Greece, and you go in all these different places, a lot of times what you'll find is, and if you're looking in a book or you never had a chance to go there, but you're looking at all these artifacts in books, if you're ever reading, a lot of times, a lot of the statues will have no arms and no heads. You ever seen those before? And you go, they have a weird way of doing that. Well, what would happen is normally when a city was conquered, especially like if the Romans went into a city, if they went into Smyrna and conquered it, they didn't. They built Smyrna. But if they went into Ephesus, if they went wherever and they conquered it, one of the things they'd do is immediately push down all the statues. And a lot of times, because of the way that they're made, the heads were not secured. When they would fall, they'd pop off. And so you'd have all these heads. You've heard of the whole thing, heads are going to roll. A lot of times, that's exactly what would happen when they conquer a city. They'd push all these statues down. The arms that were hanging would be broke off. And so then all of a sudden, you just have a torso. When these particular towns and cities were rebuilt, what would happen is you'd have all these torsos and you'd have all these heads and arms. And so what they would do when they'd rebuild them is they'd stand the torso back up, and then they would just guess what head went on which torso. So it's hilarious, because sometimes you see all these artifacts, you're like, that head doesn't really match that body. And they're like, well, that's the only one we had. That's the only one we could find. You know what I mean? And so there's somebody in history going, that's not my head that you're paying homage to. You know, Bill's head's on Ted's body. You know, it's kind of a weird thing. And so a lot of times they'll leave them off, and then sometimes they'll just have different heads that are laying around on different bodies. It's just funny when you go in because they've been built and tore down so many times. This is Smyrna today. Obviously, you can see the city and the old ruins. They're still, what's all this stuff, Philip? What's all this? Yeah, they're still excavating. That's what they do when they're excavating. They're always working and digging out. But I want you to pay close attention to something. It's a beautiful city. It's still known for its beautiful ways. In biblical times, you notice how down here in what was an ancient ruin worship area, you say, how do you know that? Because that's what they always do. It's flat, and you've got the posts that are going here, and you can still see them right here. This would have been a huge area to go worship. Then you also notice this. On the top, there's an outline of this hill. In biblical times, in the town of Smyrna, and you'll see here in just a moment, from the bottom of this flat place, they built a road all the way to the top. Now, you could take a horse and buggy, or you could take a chariot or whatever, but a lot of people walked it. At the very bottom, at one end of this road, was a temple to Zeus. At the top of this road was a temple to Cybele. Cybele was the mother nature goddess, the mother goddess. She was of fertility and growth. Zeus is obviously, you know who Zeus is. Along this path, all the way to the top, they built different temples all the way up, right? And so you'd have Zeus on one side, and you'd have Apollos, and have Aphrodite, and so on and so on. All these Greek mythological gods all the way to the top. And men and women would walk that and pay homage to these different pagan deities. This particular road was called the Street of Gold. You ever heard that before? Sure, you've heard of heaven, but this was on planet Earth, and it was in Smyrna. It was known as the Street of Gold. And they would walk up and pay homage to all these different temples. You say, Phil, why are you telling us that? You got to know these things to understand the letter. Some of us just want to jump in and talk about suffering. You don't understand the context of what was going on. In Smyrna, not only did they have the street of gold where all these beautiful temples were made, but then also inside of that, they talk about this in all of our old writings, and it's documented that on each side of this road, they had planted all these beautiful trees. It was a gorgeous walkway. People would come from miles around just to walk the streets of gold. It was like think in your mind, some people want to have a big long driveway and have the trees planted as you go in, or for my golfing buddies, it's like driving into Augusta, right? With all the trees. And so people would come and they would walk, but they paid homage to all the pagan mythological gods. They were Greek. Why is that important? Well, you're going to start to see this. But not only did they worship the Greek mythological gods, but they also were into emperor worship. Smyrna was a worshiping city, but they worshiped the emperors and they worshiped the Greek gods, all right? Smyrna was settled, and I'm going to tell you more about that in just a moment, but just get it. Smyrna was settled around 1000 BC. All right, it was settled by the Greeks. The Greeks settled Smyrna first. That's important. Why is that important? Because the Greeks bring Greek gods. And so when the Greeks came and settled Smyrna, but long before John came, long before we hear any of this letter, the Greeks' influence brought Greek mythology. And so these people, these Smyrnans, begin to worship Greek gods. That's why you have the city of gold. After a while, it was destroyed in 600, 400 years later by the Lydians. The Lydians come in, tore down Smyrna, and broke it down. That's why you have all these different ruins, all these different pillars is broke down. In 290 BC, two successors of Alexander the Great come back through Smyrna, and they decide to rebuild it. So 3 decades later, or 3 centuries later, they come in, they rebuild Smyrna. So now it's been established, it's been torn down, and now it's being established again. Now we have the Greeks, we have the Lydians, and we have Alexander the Great, who have all touched this particular area on the planet. This would have been, after Alexander the Great's successors had rebuilt it, this would have been the setting for which this particular city we get in John's letter. It had hung on that long. It had all those influences. But the people of Smyrna turned into Rome worshipers. They loved the city of Rome, and they worshiped the city of Rome. They worshiped the emperors of Rome because Rome put a lot of money into Smyrna. Rome, remember Ephesus? They come up through Ephesus. The governors, although the governors would live in Ephesus, and although the capital was in Pergamon, the governors liked to visit Smyrna, and it became their little vacation hideaway. They loved to be by the sea. They loved to see all the temples, and so Rome began to dump a lot of money into it, and so the people in Smyrna fell in love with the Romans and the Roman emperors, so much so that it is said that the Romans got into a heavy battle in wintertime. Word got back to Smyrna that the Roman soldiers were dying because they were not prepared for the winter and the snow. The Smyrnans went around town, took off their own clothes, bagged them all up, and sent them to the Roman soldiers so that they could continue to fight on and not freeze to death. That's how much Smyrnans loved Rome. You say, what does that matter? You're going to see in just a second. So the Romans, because they were so thankful, in 26 AD, they said, we're so thankful that you took care of us and got us through that battle and gave us your clothes. We are sending money and are going to build a temple there so that you can personally worship the new emperor Tiberius. Nothing sounds like love more than you gave me your clothes and I'm going to let you keep worshiping me. But that's what they did. And so now all of a sudden you have the Smyrnans, watch, who were deeply entrenched from 26 AD on into Rome emperor worship and Greek mythology. They are absolutely worshiping multiple gods. They are a picture of the book of Acts where you have Paul at Mars Hill and he's debating with all the men that are worshiping all the different gods. Y'all remember that? This is a picture of that. And Paul says to them, I want to talk to you about the unknown God. These are the people in Smyrna. That's the culture. That's the people that are living there. They all get along. They all pay homage to the Roman emperor. They all walk up and down the city of gold. And then all of a sudden, God does something that turns it all upside down. Okay? After a big earthquake, Marcus Aurelius, y'all know Marcus Aurelius? All my movie buffs will know him. He's out of Gladiator, right? You remember that Roman emperor? He comes to town. There had been an earthquake that knocked everything down. Again, now we have more ruins, more broken statues, more heads were falling off, more columns, and Marcus Aurelius comes through and he builds it back up. A lot of times when you go to some of these old ancient cities, you'll see that the columns don't match. And what they would do is they repurpose some of those broken pieces, or they'd take it from other places and put it. And that's the reason it looks that way. It'd tear down, they'd build it right back up. Tear it down, they'd build it right back up. Marcus Aurelius was the last one to rebuild the city. They were set by a harbor in the Aegean Sea. And so as men and women would walk up and down the hillside visiting all the temples, Smyrna was just known for its beauty. It was unbelievable. So it got a lot of different people that would come up to visit the Street of Gold. Not only was it known for its Roman worship, not only was it known for its Greek mythology, not only was it known for the Street of Gold, not only was it known for the way that they took care of the Roman Empire, but they also became known as a place for science and medicine. That's where they put a lot of their energy, was in science and medicine. So they were super smart people. And in fact, some of y'all that know the poet Homer, it is said that this is the birthplace of Homer. That is the city of Smyrna. Today, if you were to go visit, and I want to, so if somebody wants to take me, I'll go with you, it's Izmir. Izmir is in Turkey. And so that you can go visit it today. That's the city. That's what you're dealing with. That's the history of it. You have to know that to appreciate the letter that's about to be written. Because from that heritage, something happens, okay? Fast forward a few years later, probably into the 60 A.D. era, and all of a sudden, you have Paul sitting in Ephesus. Now, we talked about Ephesus last week. After Paul, in 98 A.D.-ish, and we've got a letter coming to the church at Ephesus, and John has already pastored Ephesus. But before Ephesus, or it was an elder there, but before Ephesus was taken on by John, Paul was there. Paul ministered in Ephesus for 3 years, and it is believed that in that time frame of ministry in Ephesus for those 3 years, that Paul, in the ministry that he built, someone inside of that ministry took the gospel to Smyrna and established the church in Smyrna. It wasn't Paul, but we believe it was somebody that was associated. Why is that important? Remember what Ephesus was. It was the crossroads. Everybody came in and out of Ephesus. That's where he set up shop. That's where he taught the gospel. And more than likely, somebody visiting south from Smyrna went back north and took the gospel. When they became Christians in Smyrna, all of a sudden, we created an issue. Christians created an issue. They created an issue because they fell in love with Jesus Christ, and they said, we worship only King Jesus. Every year, the Roman Empire, who governed the Smyrna people, or were involved with the Smyrna people, expected the people of Smyrna to give a yearly sacrifice to the emperor. In this time frame, pay attention, I've already taught you this, so you're going to hear this. This time frame, the emperor was Domitian. Domitian was the cruel emperor that wanted to punish and persecute Christians. So during the time of this letter that John writes it, Domitian is the emperor. We have a church that is vulnerable in Smyrna. It's been established for several years. It's in the midst of paganism. It's in the midst of Greek mythology. It's in the midst of emperor worship. And all of a sudden, Domitian says, everyone must worship me and everyone must sacrifice to me once a year. You say, well, what do they sacrifice? Much like what they did in Old Testament days. They would use wine, honey, sheep, dove, goats, whatever it was, but it was a sacrifice from the people to the Roman emperor. And Christians stood up and said, while we will give you, he's in charge and he has authority, we will not worship nor will we sacrifice to the Roman emperor. That is problem number one. They said, well, why is that? Because we're Christians. In the midst of this martyrdom time that comes after the letter, right? He says some of you are going to die. That's martyrs. One of the most famous church leaders outside of Scripture that is a very much connected and a leader of the church, and we are very thankful for, is a man by the name of Polycarp. Polycarp was a minister. He was the bishop of Smyrna about 30 years after this letter was written. And about 30 years after this letter was written, he's leading this church that is saying no to suffering, and something happens. I'm going to tell you about it in just a moment because you need to see it. Okay? Smyrna, the church, so you're starting to see it all come together. Smyrna literally means myrrh. It's the same word that we get for the perfume myrrh. If you don't know what myrrh is, think about this. When Jesus was born, the wise men brought 3 gifts. They brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Myrrh was a spice. It was known as a spice for the living and the dead. In Smyrna, the name Smyrna is myrrh in the Greek understanding. Myrrh itself is created by taking a precious plant and breaking it down, it gives off an unbelievable aroma. It's a wonderful perfume. And in biblical days, I don't know that anybody wears myrrh today, but if you go to some of these places, you can still buy it and you still smell it. It's like, okay. But in biblical days, they would take that myrrh and they would the living would wear it out in public. That was their cologne or perfume. But when someone died, they'd also put it on them and they dressed the body with myrrh. And so we know that when Jesus died, he was dressed with spices and one of those was myrrh. But this is the name of Smyrna. Smyrna is unlike Ephesus because Smyrna did not lack love for Jesus Christ. In fact, it was the love they had for Jesus Christ that had put them in the situation that they're in. All right, is everybody caught up so far? You have an unbelievable historical place on the map. It's been touched by Romans and Greek mythology. You have people that it is illegal to be anything other than those two religions. And in the midst of that, you have a church that is born that Paul more than likely started with the help of somebody that went up there, and they are refusing to pay homage to the Roman emperor, and they're refusing to bow down and worship the Greek temple in the Greek temples or the Greek gods and goddesses. All of a sudden, they're outcast. They're doing illegal work, and the emperor and the Romans want to stop them. Domitian comes in and executes this understanding of persecution for this church. And this church, unlike Ephesus is doing fine. There's some persecution in Ephesus, but it's nothing like Smyrna. In Ephesus, their problem was they were rooting out Nicolaitans, and they were becoming judgmental of people outside the church to protect the church, but they weren't having their heads cut off. You went north a few miles, and these people were under constant attack. And it's in that setting that John writes the letter that Jesus told him to write them. And he said, listen, you need to be faithful. So the context of the letter, and I'm going to put it all into context for you. I'm going to tell you about Polycarp, and then I'm going to give you the personal application before we move any further. The reason you want to know all this, and the reason I'm taking time to do this, because what I could have done is just come in here and talk about suffering, but you're going to miss the whole point. That's half the reason that most people are biblically illiterate is because they don't take enough time to understand the context. The reason I want you to know the context is because if you're going through persecution, if you have lost your first love, if you're allowing the Nicolaitans to come in and destroy the moral compass of the church, if you are lukewarm and not hot or cold, it will directly impact the way you read the rest of Revelation. And the reason that God wrote it the certain way, he had to get the church's attention first and then share it with them, what was going to happen after the fact. In the context of this letter, check this out. Y'all ready? Here we go. Everybody good? Y'all good? All right, good. Tyler said after first service, how'd you do? I said, well, I enjoyed me. I really do love learning all this, okay? Because it really, and here's the thing is if there's nothing else that you walk away with, if you go, it's just too much for me or whatever, I hate that might be a stance that somebody might take. But if nothing else, I'll tell you this, it's a lot easier to be a believer today than it was in biblical times. And if nothing else, we need to take a lot of encouragement from them. And really, if you really look at what these early church leaders went through, it makes me feel guilty. And I feel guilty because I find it hard sometimes just to stand up for Jesus because I'm afraid of what somebody's going to say. These people had to stand up for Jesus knowing that they're about to lose their head. Right? It's an unbelievable experience. And Jesus writes it in such a way. Now watch what Jesus says to them. Watch. He says, and to the angel of the church. Remember what I said? Each letter has the same beginning but different. He speaks to them different. And each letter has an ending. It's the same but different. He promises different things. But here's what he says in Revelation 2:8 to Smyrna. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, here's what he says, the first and the last who was dead and has come to life. Why would he say it that way? Well, because these people are being threatened with death. So all of a sudden, here's what he does is he says, listen, I know you're being threatened with death. I've been dead too. But just like I'm alive, you're going to be alive too. These people are huddled up, and I don't even know where they are. I know they're in Smyrna. I don't know if they're in a house or if they're out in the wilderness where they're hiding. I don't know where they are when the letter is given to them. But what I do know is they're an enemy of the state. And what I do know is the enemy is absolutely trying to flush them out. They don't want them there. You're going to hear terms in just a moment about Jews and the way the Jews were treating these Christians. But there's a lot going on with that too. And if you don't pay attention, you'll miss it. Because these believers are huddled together. It's illegal to be a believer. And they are literally losing people that they love. Persecution has never been as bad as it is. They've been taking it from every angle. And I'm telling you, it is hard to be seen out in public. Everybody is looking for you. And Jesus steps on the scene, and his introduction is I know you're afraid of dying. I've been dead. and I live. And you're going to live too. I told the first service this, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm not. We all are going to die if Jesus doesn't return. But I'll just tell you something. Even in my non-fear of dying, I don't want to die today. There's just some things that I want to make sure they're taken care of before I get there. And I don't think you all are ready for Tyler to be fully in charge, so I need to stick around for just a minute. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. If I have someone sitting there with me and they go, listen, I know you're afraid to die and you're about to die, but I've already died and I live again. You're going to be okay. It would encourage me. Because death's the one thing none of us have ever been to and had anybody report back from except for Scripture. And if every day you can lose your life, it's going to feel good to have Jesus Christ come in and say to you, I was dead and I live again. And part of us, even in that pressure cooker, we go, that's right, he did it, he went to the cross, right? It resets us. He went to the cross, I can do it too. And that's how he introduces himself to the church in Smyrna. So they're all huddled up together, right? What are we going to do? Because I'm telling you, as I said earlier, the next part of this letter would be so much more encouraging to the people in Smyrna if he said, and I've heard what they're threatening with you to do to you, and I'm on my way. John sent the letter ahead. I'll be there in 4 days. Y'all buckle down. I'm going to settle scores. I'd be like, oh yeah, he's coming to town. Yeah. Yeah. No, that ain't what he says. He says these words right here. He says to the church of Smyrna, they're all circled up in their small group and the lights are out. They don't want anybody to know that they've got a letter from John because he's exiled. He wasn't even supposed to send this letter, and somehow they've smuggled it into him. They got a letter from John, and not all of them know John, but he was an elder down in Ephesus, and they know that he's written letters to them before. And so they go, John's got something to say to us. And here's what Jesus says through the hand of John. He says, I know your tribulation. These are the words. Now look here. This word tribulation is going to come up over and over and over through the book of Revelation. Pay close attention to it. Because if I talk to you about the book of Revelation and I mention the word tribulation, then all of a sudden we start going, well, do you think there's a 10-year tribulation, and how does that work when the Lord comes back? That's what we attribute it to. In this particular context, though, and there is some of that in the book of Revelation, but in this context, right, and it sets forth the context of the rest of the book, in this context, he's talking about the people in Smyrna. And tribulation means pressure, it means persecution. He says, I know what it is. I'm going to tell you what it is in just a moment. I've already got it on my next slide, but I'm going to show you what it is. But he says these things. He says, I know your tribulation. And then he says, I know your poverty. These people were sitting and had their lives ruined financially, materialistically, because they were believers. All of these men and women that are living in Smyrna were part of the community. They were well adjusted. They were having fun. They were doing their thing. Everybody was progressing. And by all means, Smyrna was a happy little town worshiping the Roman emperor and worshiping the different Greek gods. They all got along. And just like yesterday, some of y'all were texting going, do y'all want to go to the lake? Up until this point, they were texting going, hey, you want to go up the street of gold? I need to run up by Apollo's temple. And they say, yeah, let's go. Everybody got along. Everybody was adjusted. People had stores out on the street. They were making money when people come into the harbor. And when some of those people come up from Ephesus, they all knew the governors and the emperors because they all traveled through there to be by the sea. And then all of a sudden, these people fall in love with Jesus Christ and they're ostracized. And the first way that they face persecution is just like what you see today. They don't just go out and kill you first because they want to give you a chance to come back. They squeeze you to a point to make life so miserable that you have nowhere to turn but back to them. So once they stopped being worshipers of the Greek gods and emperors, and once they started saying, we're not sacrificing anymore to Emperor Domitian, all of a sudden their finances went down the drain. People stopped buying from them. People stopped visiting their home. People stopped giving to them. Their finances went first. Then all of a sudden their homes went. They couldn't afford their homes, so now they lost their home. I'm just telling you, y'all can look at me however you want to on Sunday morning. I'm just telling you, if today I said at the end of this, there's been an edict given out by the government that says this, if you do not stop coming to church here and you do not denounce Jesus Christ, tomorrow all your assets and your finances are going to be seized by the IRS. I guarantee you, you can look at me however you want to, but I guarantee you, if I told you that this morning and it was the gospel, some of y'all had to think about whether you're going to be a part of the church. You don't have to like it. That's the truth. Some of us say, well, I need to pray about it. Right? Some of us would say, well, you know what? I don't know. What's it matter? Jesus knows my heart anyway, so I'm just going to go along to get along because I don't want them to seize my assets and I don't want them to take my money. That's what we would start doing. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just telling you right now, that's what you do. I work with humans for an existence. I know me. If Mandy and I had to walk out of here today and knowing this was the last day that I could afford to feed my children, I'd really have to concentrate on what I'm about to do next. And I'd love to tell you I'd walk into my house and say, the Lord will provide. Because I know at the end of that month, Kingston Utilities is going to send me a bill. And I pick up the phone and go, hey, the Lord's going to provide. They're going to say, well, your power's going to be off while we wait. Right? Be honest. And all of a sudden, the banks pull up and they take my truck because I can't pay for that. And we come down here, we can't turn the lights on because they've taken all of our finance. So we have to open the doors. And some of us that are working and trying to live through the function of the church will say, I can't work here anymore. I can't make any money. And then you start trickling in here and going, they fired me at work today. Why? Because I go to church. We've had people quit church for lesser reasons. I've had people tell me, I am not telling people I go to your church because I don't want to know what they'll say. In 2025. And you're going to tell me that you could do what these people in Smyrna did? No, ma'am. No, ma'am. And all of a sudden, Jesus says, I know your poverty. And they're going, do you? Because we out in the woods, we ain't got nowhere to go. Kids are crying. And then he says, but you are rich. Now, I said this in the first service. You know, when people say, well, I'm hurting, but I'm rich. I've got what matters. When somebody says that to you, I know they're trying to encourage you, but that still stings, doesn't it? Well, you got your priorities right. You got what matters right. Well, yeah, that's true. I do. Thank you so much for the encouragement, but that's not feeding the kids. These guys, I'm telling you, are up against it, and Jesus knows it. And then he says these words right here. And the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews. Now, pay close attention, because the next three words to that, and are not. You know what a Jewish person is. You're thinking of the Jews just like I am of biblical days. Jewish understanding is a religion. And you had a Jewish religion, and people were Jews and Gentiles. That's what it was happening. In biblical days, there were men and women who were associating themselves with Jewish religion who were not Jewish in religion. They were Jewish in heritage, meaning this: they had mothers and fathers who were Jewish. They come from a lineage of Jewish people. And these people were not practicing Jews. They did not go to temple. They did not go to synagogues. They did not practice. And it was the very ones who claimed to be Jewish, were not practicing religion at all, that started pointing out the things that they saw in the Christians. These particular Jews that were claiming to be Jewish but were not, and even the practicing Jews said, they're not with us, and they go, oh yeah, my mom and dad was Jewish. It'd be like a Christian that claims to be a Christian but never goes to church and does not do the Christian things, saying something to other Christians about the way they're living their life. And they would say things like, you're a hypocrite, right? That's who these Jews were. They were not religious at all, but they were pointing out the things that the Christians were doing in order to stir it up so that the Christians would be persecuted. Every day that they would go out, those particular Jews, dressed in the garb but not practicing, would watch what the Christians do and make note of it. They would turn them into the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire would come snatch them up, seize their assets, and make life miserable for them. You say, well, what else was happening? Here's what the Bible says. It says, but they are a synagogue of Satan. I think that's a weird way for Jesus to say it. I love the way Jesus says stuff. He doesn't care what you think. That's a weird thing to say, isn't it? What about they're a synagogue of Satan. What's synagogue? Synagogue means worship. And Satan is, well, he's Satan. He says these Jews here are a synagogue of Satan. What does that mean? It means these non-practicing Jews that have Jew heritage, that are pointing out all the things in Christian in order to get them killed and to get them ostracized and to lose their housing, lose their kids, lose their way of life. These Jews here are practicing the work of Satan. Therefore, they are part of the worshipers of Satan. They're not literally worshiping Satan, but because they're doing the work of Satan by turning these Christians in, they might as well be worshipers of him. And he says, that's what they're doing. He says, guys, I just want you to know they are under the influence of Satan in what they're doing to you. And that's why you have tribulation. A lot of times we want to monkey around and change our vernacular, not call a spade a spade. But there's people on this planet and in this earth and in this community and all over the other communities that are actively working for the will of Satan himself. See, it shocked you when I said that, didn't it? Right? But it's true. They go out and they do things to cause other people harm who follow Jesus Christ, thinking that they're doing a good thing. But from heaven, Jesus doesn't mince word. He says they worship at the feet of Satan, doing his bidding for him. Satan didn't step into Smyrna with his little pitchfork and his horns going, there's Christian, there's Christian, there's Christian. No. He raised up people inside of it that masquerade as a religious person in order to point out the flaws governmentally of the believers. And Jesus knew it. And Jesus goes, I know they're bad people. They're crying. They're going, do you know why they do this to us? How long is this evil going to last? How long? He goes, they're of the synagogue of Satan. So what tribulation were they facing? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, it was because of their faithfulness to Jesus Christ. Ephesus church were floundering. They forgot why they were doing what they were doing. But if you went north where the pressure was harder, where it was harder to be a Christian, these people got it. They knew why they did what they did. You had to know why you do what you do in Smyrna. Otherwise, you'd never do it because you were losing everything. They were under pressure because they worshiped the Roman Emperor Domitian. Remember what I told you? And they refused to do the yearly worship. And because of that, the Roman Empire was after the Christians. The Jews, the so-called Jews, not the real Jews, but the so-called Jews say, hey, they didn't do their yearly emperor worship. They're not paying their taxes, right? And stir it up. They made an anonymous phone call to the Smyrna emperor worshiper team and going, hey, I know Bobby lives by me. He's not doing what he's supposed to. Not only that, but they were viewed as antisocial elitist. Christians were. Christians were viewed as antisocial elitists because they didn't participate in the other things. So when they would go out and worship the gods in the temples, Christians didn't go. When they would go out and worship the emperors, the Christians didn't go. And so all of a sudden, the people in Smyrna, where they all used to get along, you had this group of people that pulled back and were a church, and they go, oh, you think you're too good, don't you? You think you're better than us. You think you're something because you worship this invisible God ain't nobody ever heard of. And so now all of a sudden, they're antisocial, they're elitist, and they're not conforming to the government and worshiping the emperor. But not only that, these Jews, remember what I said, blasphemy? The blasphemy word that is used there means intense slander. These Jews would mark a Christian or a group of Christians and stir it up by starting rumors about them in order for the government to move in, to charge them, to put them in prison, and ultimately to kill them. These Jewish people and Roman folks would begin to charge that these Jews were cannibals. Remember, I mentioned that to you a couple of weeks ago. The reason they were saying they were cannibals is because Christians participated in the Lord's Supper. And these Jewish people would say they eat the body of Christ and they drink his blood. They're cannibals. They also said that they were a perversion. Now, how anybody in this day and time could accuse Christians of being a perversion when we know the perversion that took place in most Roman empires in all their festivals is shocking to me, but they did it nonetheless. They said these Christians are perverted in the way that they greet one another, meaning this, the Christians at the time, we don't do this anymore, thank goodness, but what they would do is they greet each other with a holy kiss. And so when they would come into each other and they were walking into their house or to worship together, they kiss each other on each side of the face. And these Jews go, ooh, you're going to get cooties. And so they get mad at them. And then they say, look, they're kissing each other's wives and husbands and kissing and kids and all that stuff. So now they're a perversion in the town. Now they're antisocial. They're cannibals. They're a perversion. Then they accused them of being homewreckers. They said they're tearing up families. You say, well, how is that possible? Because when the gospel spread, you'd have a wife that would get saved, or you'd have a husband that gets saved. And guess what happens? If you take someone in a family that's married, a husband and wife, and one of them begins to worship Jesus Christ, and the other one worships multiple mythological gods and the Roman emperor, it's just a matter of time before there's problems at home. So now you had divorce rates going up because Christians were going, I can't live with them. Or the pagan would say, I don't want a Christian spouse, and they were breaking up homes. And so they said, and they're breaking up families. They were accused of being atheist. And the reason they were accused of being atheists is because they didn't believe in multiple gods that you could see. They didn't go to a temple where you could worship Zeus and who he was, or Apollos, or Sybil, or any of that stuff. They had worshipped an invisible God. I told you this the other day. They worship an invisible God, so all these pagans and these Romans said they're atheists. They don't even believe in our God. They say that we've never even heard of it, and it's invisible. So now they're atheist, antisocial, perversion, cannibals. These are the Christians. And they're running for their life, and they don't pay their taxes, and they don't sacrifice to the Roman emperor. So they're political rebels. This is the pressure this particular group of people is under. It makes my head sweat thinking about it. In the midst of all of this, and I want to tell you about this guy. I got a text afterwards, and somebody said, I'd never heard of this guy before. There's a famed, and probably one of the most famous historical, biblical, not biblical, but theological characters in our faith, and his name is Polycarp. Now, if you're from the South, you think of carp as the fish. It's not the same thing, okay? It doesn't mean many fishes. Polycarp was, now here's why it plays into it. I want you to pay close attention. And if you ever have an opportunity, you want to do some reading, you need to go read about Polycarp. There's a little letter called the Martyrdom of Polycarp. Polycarp, the reason he plays into this, remember what he's talking about. He's talking about being faithful to the end, even until death. We see this lived out years after the letter was written. Later in the early, mid to late hundreds, there's a man by the name of Polycarp. Polycarp was the bishop of the church of Smyrna, the one that received the letter. Polycarp was also a disciple of John sitting in Patmos. John had raised up Polycarp in Christianity. Much like Paul had Timothy, John had Polycarp. In our Christian heritage, if you ever read about it, I told the first service, I may do a Wednesday night class at some point on ancestors of the faith that you should know from a history standpoint, because we get a lot of our history from them. Polycarp is one of them. Ignatius is another one. Jerome is one. Germanicus was one. Germanicus had just been killed in Smyrna, and all of a sudden, the people in Smyrna, about 30 years after the letter was written, Polycarp is the bishop of this church that stood the test of time, that faced down the persecution, and all of a sudden, they said, the people of Smyrna said, we want Polycarp. Polycarp's leading the church of Smyrna during this time. After the letter, don't mix those two up. This is after the letter. Polycarp would have remembered the letter from John, from Patmos, to the church of Smyrna, telling them to be brave. And all of a sudden, the people in the amphitheater, after Germanicus is killed and they took out a Christian, they said, we want Polycarp. Now, what you don't understand about this understanding of Polycarp was Polycarp was 86 years old at the time of his martyrdom. And the people heard that they were looking for Polycarp, and so his people came to him and said, Polycarp, you need to get out of town. They were coming to arrest you, and they're going to kill you just like Germanicus. And Polycarp, being 86 years old, being a disciple of John, knowing Ignatius, knowing all these other great biblical leaders, these are the people that the biblical characters handed the gospel off that got it to us. Polycarp said, I ain't going nowhere. And they said, please, we don't want to lose you. So after some persuading, Polycarp gets on a donkey or something and moves toward uptown just a little bit, out of town, and goes to a friend's house and stays at their house. Now, all of this is documented. We have a 2nd century document that shares with us the story I'm about to tell you. 86-year-old Polycarp, who is now leading the church that Jesus shared with them to stand firm, is hiding out in a home just miles away from where he was at 86 years old. Well, there was a Roman governor at the time named Herod. Sound familiar? Different Herod, same name. Herod decides he's going after Polycarp and he's putting an end to this Christianity. So he assembles this young group of soldiers. They get on their horses and they go into town looking for Polycarp. But nobody will tell them where Polycarp is. The Christians aren't talking. They said, we're going to get this Polycarp. We've got strict orders to find him. Well, they can't find him. And so all of a sudden, they pick up 2 young Christian boys, much like my boys. They pick them up. They said, we're going to torture you till you tell us where Polycarp is. And they go, we don't care. We're not doing it. Jesus told my mom and dad and my grandparents to go till death. Well, about 20 minutes later, one of those guys started singing and said, I'll tell you where he's at. Right? By that time, it had wore off. They were like, no, I'll tell you. So these 2 young guys lead the soldiers to Polycarp, who's staying up the road at a master's house. But Polycarp had slid outside and went to a back house and was hiding from these soldiers. He hears the soldiers pull up, and they start questioning the master of the house, and Polycarp can't take it anymore, so he stands up, he opens the door, and he goes, here I am. This is all documented. This is historical documentation. When the soldiers see Polycarp step out from behind the hay bale that's in the back of that little shed, they look at each other and go, they sent us after this guy? Look how old he is. And they struggled. These soldiers struggled. And while they were talking amongst themselves, Polycarp, being 86, saw him, and they had been looking for him for days and hadn't eaten or drink. And so he says to the master of the house, would you please make these men food and something to drink? And they were like, really? And they were like, yeah, we're going to feed you before you take me in. Isn't that something? So they take the men in, they set them down at the table, and they begin to feed them. And Polycarp goes, before we go, would you give me 1 hour to pray? And this is so awesome. And then men go, yeah, well, you're 86. What are you going to do? Yeah, sure, go ahead, pray. So Polycarp backs up from the table, this is all documented, backs up from the table and begins to pray. Not only did he pray, but he prayed for so long, he prayed for 2 hours straight. The letter tells us that Polycarp, the guy that was writing this out about Polycarp for the next 2 hours prayed for every single person he had ever met throughout life that he could remember. Whether they were known or not known, young or old, didn't matter. He prayed for all of them. He prayed for all the churches. Ultimately, you're going to find out Polycarp actually wrote letters to the church in Philippi. Much like Paul wrote to the Philippian letters, Polycarp has his own where he would encourage them. He wrote to all of them, but he there for 2 hours. It moved the soldiers so much that they had to talk amongst themselves whether they were actually going to take him back. They were like, he's 86. What's he going to do anyways? I don't know why we need to take this guy in. It challenged them. Well, it didn't save him, so they loaded him up. After he got done praying, Polycarp said, you guys need to do whatever you're going to do. So they got him and put him inside the carriage, and they take him back to town. 2 of the men was riding beside him, and they go, listen, you're so old, you're going to die anyways. Why don't you just tell him you're not serving Christ. Just tell him anything. Look, dude, you're going to die anyways. Just go over there. If you'll just tell them you're good, you're not going to do this anymore, they'll let you walk. And Polycarp goes, I'm not doing that. He says, take me over there. You know, now he's feeling himself. You know what I mean? He's like, no, sir, I fed you. You got full belly. Let's go. I hope you ate your lunch. Here we go, right? In the meantime, and they pull up to the stadium, they take Polycarp to an amphitheater in Smyrna, much like the amphitheaters I've showed you before and all the other places. They go in. It looks just like, you want to know what it looks like? It looks like half of the movie off Gladiator, half of the Colosseum. They take Polycarp, they pull him out, and they're trying to get him to denounce his faith. Those young guys are trying to, and so much so that they're trying to just get him to stop, that he says, no, I'm going in here. They yank him out of the carriage, and it dislocates his leg. He puts his leg back into place, doesn't even grimace, puts his leg back in place, and they yank him into the amphitheater. And all the people have gathered around to see this famous Polycarp, who's pastoring the church in Smyrna, this so-called Christian, and they're about to absolutely kill him if he doesn't denounce his faith. Herod walks up to him and says, listen, I know you're old. If you'll just denounce your faith, then we'll let you go. And Polycarp goes, I'm not going to. He says, I'll tell you what, just say this. Say, away with the atheist. The reason he says that, you can read it for yourself. The Christians would have been behind him watching what was going on. And when they asked him to say away with the atheist, it was a way of him denouncing his faith. And literally what he would have to done, he'd had to turn to the Christian and say, away with the atheist, meaning I don't believe what they do. Polycarp standing there, he looks at Herod and he looks at the crowd and he goes, all right, away with the atheist, and points to everybody inside the stadium. Herod is incensed. He's angry. He says, Polycarp, you know, if you do not denounce Christ, I'm going to have lions released on you. At this point of the story, it kind of becomes comical. If you read it, it's unbelievable. And Polycarp 86 goes, you got to do whatever you got to do. I ain't going nowhere. And you need to know I am a Christian. He says it boldly. I am a Christian. So Herod looks over at a guy by the name of Philip. He's documented. Philip, and he says, Philip, release the lions. This guy was the guy that had all the wild beasts. And Philip's standing over there watching what's going on. This is what's funny. He goes, I can't release the lions today. What do you mean you can't release the lions? He goes, it's illegal. We had the lions out yesterday. You can't have them out today. We're not going to be able to get the lions out. And Polycarp's like, yep, told you. Right? It's funny. It's just comical. Right? You know, this guy like Herod's like, ugh, what else do we got? You know? He says, Polycarp, if I don't have lions, I'm going to burn you at the stake. And Polycarp says, that's okay, because I already had a vision 3 days ago that said that my pillow turned into fire. I knew I was going to be burned at the stake today. He says, please, just denounce your faith. He says, I'm telling you, and here's what he says. Polycarp has a famous saying, you can look it up. He says, 86 years I have served him, and he never did me any injury. How then can I blaspheme my king who saved me in front of everybody? Herod says, get all the sticks. So they gather all the sticks up, And they pull it together, and they make a huge place for him in the middle of the amphitheater to burn him. They bring the stake out. The letter goes on to say, and the writings say, that he begins to strip down all of his clothes. And here's what all the onlookers, the Christians, were so shocked about. Come on, JT. Is he took off his own sandals. For years, Polycarp was so revered that when he would go to a Christian's house, he never took off his own sandals, because that was one of the things that people did. They would take your sandals off, wash your feet. And it was such a shock to see him take his own sandals off, because they loved him and had so much respect for him. But there he is, taking them off. As he steps into the pit to be burned, inside the wood, the guys come out to nail him to the stake, and Polycarp goes, don't nail me to the stake. Just don't nail me to the stake. I'll stand there and take it. He said, the one that's given me strength to go this far is the one that can hold me strong in the middle of the flames. He said, all right, have it your way. They take him to the middle of the stakes and they tie him up. He's tied in there. They backed away, and the letter says that Polycarp began to pray, and he prayed and prayed and prayed. And once he finished praying, they lit the flames. They lit the wood with the flames. The story goes, the letter was written in such a way that as they began to burn and Polycarp standing in the middle, he did not move. He stood there, but the flames began to make an arc around him. And it flamed up around him so much so, listen to this, so much so that as the flames got higher, they got further away from him, and his skin began to glow. They said he actually looked good. So much so that as his skin heated up, it would not burn, but it began to give off a fragrance. And they said inside the stadium, it began to smell good. He's sitting there burning, but he's not burning, and it begins to smell good. And Herod is so incensed that his soldier goes up and stabs Polycarp, and he dies. He's a martyr in Smyrna. One of the forefathers of the Smyrna church. One of those that would have heard the letter that said, don't you back up, and there he is. The letter says that after Polycarp was stabbed and the blood began to come out, he bled so much that the blood ran down and put the fire out. It turned Smyrna upside down because they had seen so many people killed. They said, is this the way all Christians die? The bravery and how he lived his life. Polycarp's martyrdom changed the way Smyrna lived from that point forward. The gospel continued to go out through all other means, but he was one that got it. He was willing to suffer. Jesus goes on and says to the people in Smyrna, he says this, do not fear what you're about to suffer. He tells those people this was coming. Polycarp didn't know at that time. That was decades before. That was centuries before he would die. But as he becomes a pastor and the bishop of the church, do not fear. Sometimes we think Jesus is going to step in and take it away. But Jesus says, no, I'm not taking it away. You got to walk this path, but don't you be afraid. I'm telling you, we're going to come down here in just a moment. We're going to pray, God, get me out of this. God, take this away. God, do all this stuff. And this is where people's crisis of faith come from. It's not that they don't believe. They just don't believe that Jesus won't do something. When sometimes Jesus says, I'm not taking that away. I'm going to make you strong through it. What you think you're going to gain from me taking it away, I'm going to make much more myself by allowing you to walk through it with my hand. I'm just telling you, if somebody tied me up at stake, I've told you before, I'm a screamer. I'm the exact opposite of Polycarp. I'd say, you better nail me to that thing. I'm going to run. I will run. Yeah, I'll just tell you, I'm not going to sit up here and blow smoke. I'm just telling you right now, if it was all on the line like that, I don't know what I'd do. Oh, I know y'all tough guys. Y'all say, yeah, burn me. I'm telling you, I don't know. Y'all can't even sit out in the rain. You got to have a poncho. And you're telling me to go stand in the fire? No, get out of here. And we have these men and women that's gone before us. And Jesus wrote, and he says, I don't want you to back up. And here's what he says, be faithful until death. Let me wrap this up this way. That's who they are. So now they've gotten their letter to say, get back in there. You're going to die. He's going to put some of you in jail. That's what Satan does. But you got the crown of life coming for you. So let me ask you this as we wrap up. How do you prepare for suffering? Here's a couple of things in your own life. When you're facing the things that the church in Smyrna did, when you're facing what John faced in exile, when you're facing what Polycarp did, the gospel went out from Polycarp's death. It went out. It didn't destroy it. It went the other way. It turned people in Smyrna towards Christ. How do you behave when you're suffering? Number one is remain faithful. Be faithful until death. The thing you're suffering with, you feel like it's going to kill you, remain faithful. Listen to me. When we're suffering, it's the moment that the enemy pushes us back. But remain faithful. If you're suffering, you're hurting, it's easy to not be a part of this, to not come to church, to back off of relationships because they've made you angry. You don't want to put up with it. We back up. Suffering pushes us back. I'm just telling you, suffering pushes us back. But here's what Jesus says. Don't back up. Remain faithful. Remain faithful in everything that you do, even when you're suffering. You say, well, you don't know what it's like to live with her. You don't know what it's like to live with him. I don't know, you're exactly right, but remain faithful. Jesus will work more in the time of you remaining faithful than he ever will when you run. When you run, when you back up, when you pull yourself aside. See, here's the thing, but this, suffering wants to isolate you from God, from love, and from people. We go through a hard thing. Think about what we do. When we go through a hard thing, we dive into a bottle. We close our door and don't come out for several days. We log off of all of our social media. We do all these things. We pull back. I ain't seen them in church in weeks. I've just been going through some stuff. That's the wrong thing. That's when the enemy's got you. Yesterday afternoon, I didn't feel good. I didn't feel good all day yesterday. And so I was laying around and taking some medicine. I just didn't feel good yesterday. And I'm not telling you that to feel sorry for. I'm just telling you. And I didn't have my phone. And when I finally checked my phone last night before I went to bed, I had a bunch, but I had three different messages from three different people who were in a moment of suffering and going, pray for me, help me, can I meet with you? They're suffering. And here's the reason. Here's what most every one of them said. I've lost everything. It pushes you back. See, it's in suffering. It's the dark hopelessness of suffering that our spirits are broken and we give up. A person that gives up has spent days suffering before they ever gave up. Number 2 is stand on what you know to be true. If you're suffering, stand on what you know to be true. Suffering will cause you to not know what's up and what's down. Suffering leads to doubt. When I hurt, right, you start doubting, is this worth it? Why am I doing this? It leads to doubt. Your mind gets all messed up with doubt. But listen, stand on what you know to be true. Sometimes people come to me and they'll say, I don't know what to do. I don't know. And these people went to Jesus. Jesus says, stand on what you know to be true. Here's what I know to be true. Satan's going to do this. He's after you. I understand it, but I've got the crown of life for you. Stand on what you know to be true. Do not let suffering cause you doubt. To doubt where you work, who you're married to, where you go to church. Don't do that. That's what suffering does. We think better when we feel better. When you're suffering, you don't make good choices. You ever ask somebody that's sick what they want to eat? I don't care, just fix something. Right? If they feel good, you say, what do you want to eat? And they go, they got a list. Right? When I'm suffering, it's just don't talk to me. That's what it does. Always remember, pain will always go somewhere. When you're suffering, pain always goes somewhere. I don't care if it's physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, pain always goes somewhere. You cannot be in pain and it not go somewhere. And so the fear is for these people in Ephesus is them to be in pain and in fear and to go backwards because that pain will drive you away. But in our lives, you need to know, some of us in here, the reason you have contention in your marriage is because you're married to somebody. You say, well, they're mean to me. They said this. They're in pain. Pain always moves. I shared this with CR the other day. Pain always moves. If I walk into my house in a little while without my shoes on and I step, one of my dogs has got a dog bone that they keep chewing up and I want to throw away and my wife goes, you can't throw that away. And I'm like, watch me. But they drop it on the floor. If I walk through my house without my shoes on and I step on that, guess what's going to happen? It's going to hurt the bottom of my foot, but that pain ain't going to stay there. It's going to move. It's going to run right up all my shin bone, into my knee bone, into my leg bone, my hip bone. It's going to grab every one of them ribs. It's going to jump up in my esophagus and come right across my teeth. And it's going to be in the form of words that I wish I had never said. Right? Ow, That's pain leaving the body. It goes somewhere. You come in from work tomorrow and you're stressed and they go, honey, how was your day? Don't talk to me. I need you to leave me alone. What's that about? What did I do? It's pain. And suffering will cause you that. I got to be done. And when you're suffering, always remember what's in your cup. I heard this is a great illustration. I stole it. But a guy asked his team, he was mentoring these teams, and he said, if I'm walking through the house, carrying my coffee, and somebody bumps into me, what did I spill? And they said, you spilled it because somebody bumped into you. But what did I spill? Well, they bumped into you. I spilled coffee. Why did I spill coffee? Because they bumped into you. You said, no, I spilled coffee because that's what's in my cup. See, everybody in here, you're carrying stuff around. You're dealing with stuff, and we bump into each other, and stuff spills out. See, if I'd had water in my cup, I'd spilt water. If I had Coke in my cup, I'd spilt Coke. Right? If I'd had sweet tea, I'd have spilled sweet tea. Some of us in here, you bump into them and they spill out anger. That's what they're carrying in their cup. They spill out sarcasm. That's what they're carrying in their cup. They spill out fear. That's what they're carrying in their cup. Every single person in here, you're walking through your suffering. You got something in your cup and you're going to get bumped into and it's going to spill out. And you're going to you bumped into them this morning. You don't know why they said what they said before you came into church this morning. You were hoping a preacher would say something. Here he is talking about what's in your cup. And some of us in here, here's what's happening. Suffering has caused you to go the other way. And Jesus Christ steps on the line. He says, don't you back up. Satan has a plan for you, but don't you back up. And if you will maintain your focus on me in the suffering, I have better things for you. They may take your life, but I'll give you the crown of life in heaven. God, I love you. Thank you for the church at Smyrna. Thank you for the rich heritage. Thank you for those who have gone before us. Thank you for John and Patmos receiving your word. Thank you for the church that's huddled up in the trees and in the shadows because the world hates them. They're accused. They're slandered. They're going to lose their life. Even as we read on into Revelation, you said that there's a seal, and when the seal's broken, there's men and women who are under the seal that were martyred, many coming out of Smyrna. I'm not going to save you from the death. I'm going to give you life in your death. And Jesus, to be honest with you, we don't have anything suffering-wise that can compare to those that's gone before us. We can't compare our life to Polycarp, but we're dealing with real stuff. Some of us in here are going through issues with our health. Some are going through work issues, finance issues, marriage issues or lack thereof, children issues, addiction issues. Jesus, I pray that you'd move during this time of invitation. Meet those who are suffering. While you may not always remove it, would you give us the courage to walk trusting you? We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand, let's sing for a moment of invitation.